Alright guys, welcome back to this video. So in this one, I'm going to cover one of the best techniques we can use to make our videos look fantastic and really get across to our viewers what we're doing with our work. So in this video, we're going to cover time lapses, and you can create time lapses practically on any camera, but the way you operate them can vary from camera to camera. For instance, on my professional camera that I'm filming on right now, you have to do all the photo settings manually, such as the shutter speed, the intervals between the photos, the ISO, white balance, and so on. But whereas my GoPro, all you have to do is select the interval and then press record. My GoPro then creates a time-lapse video internally. Unlike my professional camera, with my GoPro, I don't have to export my photos, string them together in another software, save it, and then import it to my editing software to then use. Similarly, phones nowadays also have this same feature as the GoPros, allowing you to create a time-lapse without having to do anything other than set the interval time. And when I say interval, I mean the time between each photo taken for the time-lapse. A time-lapse works exactly the same way as a video does, but instead of having 30 frames every second or 24 frames every second, a time-lapse can be 1 frame every 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, and so on. It's just spread out over a longer period of time. That being said, the interval is just how often your camera takes a photo, very similar to your frame rate. For longer time lapses, we use longer intervals as a rule of thumb. However, it also depends on how long you want the footage to be. For example, if you run a time lapse over 1 minute with a 1 second interval, you're gonna have 60 frames. If your project plays at 30 frames a second, you'll have 2 seconds of footage. On a similar note, if you run a 5-minute time lapse with a 1 second interval, you're gonna have 300 frames, resulting in a 10-second video when it's played back at 30 frames a second. These two factors tie into how long your video is actually going to be. When filming something that takes a long time, like maybe a couple of hours, you don't want to use a 1 second interval because that'll take hundreds of frames across your time lapse and make your video extremely long and then out of place in your final edit. If you're filming a job that takes 2 hours, you want to make sure that your time lapse is lasting roughly between 10 and 20 seconds. So a 10-second clip played at 30 frames a second will have 300 frames in it. Suppose your goal is to have 10 seconds worth of footage and your job will take 1 hour to do. In that case, you're going to want to ensure that you have 300 frames spread across that 1 hour of time-lapsing. So here's for a little bit of complicated maths. To do that, we need to divide the seconds in that hour, which is 3,600, by the total number of frames you need to make a 10-second piece of footage, which is 300 frames. The result is 12, which means you need an interval time of 12 seconds to get a 10-second piece of footage over that 1 hour of time-lapse in your work. This interval number changes if you want 20 seconds of footage. In that case, you need 600 frames to make 20 seconds of footage, and now your interval time is going to be 6 seconds. So another thing to keep in mind is how fast the scene is moving that you're going to film. When things are moving really fast, a shorter interval time is required to catch enough frames to create a smooth time-lapse sequence. And on the other hand, when things are moving slow, a long interval time is appropriate to get rid of excess duplication of frames. Nailing your interval time is key, and it's very much like your frame rate. When things are moving fast, you want a higher frame rate to fill in the gaps, and if things are moving really slow, you can obviously drop that frame rate, and then it's going to be appropriate for what's happening in your scene. So this does take a bit of trial and error, so stick it out and it will eventually become second nature. You'll be able to see your scene and just be like, that's the interval I want for that. So what you can do is go practice on the clouds. The clouds are a great way to get a sense of what interval time that you're going to need. So on a windy day, clouds are going to move in fast, so you want a shorter interval time, whereas on a day that there's not a lot of wind, you can have a longer interval time. So go ahead and practice with the clouds. That is how I learned to do a time lapse and get smooth time lapses. It really gave me the ability to have a feel for how fast something is moving and what interval time that I wanted to do. So whatever camera you have, navigate the settings and go to the time-lapse feature and start practicing with your time-lapses. Like I say, the best thing to do is practice on the sky. So that's it for this video. I shall see you in the next one.